When the Libertines split up back in 2004, it would have been easy to assume that Pete Doherty was kicked out of the band against his will and subsequently formed Baby Shambles to make a big comeback, particularly because of clips like this.
I suppose I couldn't say you left the Libertines. Did the Libertines leave you? I mean, what happened?
Yeah, they left me by the side of the road with a plastic bag. All kinds of bitterness. Well, in my mind, really, and I can say this forever, I suppose, but people might laugh at it, but I don't think I ever really left the Libertines, nor can I ever leave the Libertines. You know, having been the founder of the band with Carl, but that sounds silly, doesn't it, given that they played all the festivals without me and made it difficult, no, impossible for me to play live with them.
Could there be some kind of rapprochement with the Libertines? Can you imagine playing again with Carl Barrett?
You're asking the wrong person, do you know what I mean?
No, I'm asking the right person.
Well, no, because I've made attempts to talk to him and he doesn't want to know at the moment, so when his lordship is ready to talk to me, I'll still be here.
And would you play again with him?
Well, yeah, if I'm able-bodied, I'll play.
However, in the subsequent years, we've learnt more about what really happened, and it's become apparent that Doherty had massive doubts about his compatibility with the Libertines, not long after the band released their first album. In his book, A Likely Lad, he talks about the anticlimax of being on Top of the Pops in 2003, when they played Time for Heroes in front of a renter crowd. He reflects on it, saying, "Looking back, it's probably the start of a series of anticlimaxes or disappointments, frustrations I had with the band that led to me getting booted out." He then goes on to describe life after the band were signed, saying, "When you become part of the industry, you've got to perform. You're almost whipped into it. It was all tour managers and regimes. It was the industrialisation of the Libertines." The so-called guerrilla gigs and the breaking down of barriers between band and fans is always a big thing attributed to the Libertines, and something that really informed the rest of the scene. But according to Doherty, the rest of the band weren't really into it. He explains this, saying, "The guerrilla gigs were always a proper buzz for me. I loved it, really enjoyed it. But Carl, John and Gary were really against them. The problem for them was we started to get loads of press about it. Journalists loved the idea. They were like, this is great. The Libertines giving back to their fans. So they went along with it in the press. Carl's no mug. He could see it was creating a myth, a legend. But it was their idea of a proper grim nightmare. I'm not saying that to be nasty, that's just how it was. A complete anathema to them. They hated it." From this point on, it seems there was a constant fraction and difference of ideals in the band. After touring Japan in 2003, Doherty describes, "I was really raw, feeling a bit constrained with the framework of the Libertines as it was. I just really wanted to lash out at the band. I wanted the lads to be part of the chaos and the fun, and everyone was reining it in a bit. And I was really reining it out, if that's an expression. I was feeling a lot of resentment towards Carl. I felt certain songs that were being credited to us both were mine, and I always made a point of saying, Carl sings that song, I sing these songs." And this is where we see the birth of Baby Shambles, as after trying to persuade the band to record, he got hold of a studio himself, and in his own words, recorded not just the bedrock of the second Libertines album, but also the bedrock of the first Baby Shambles album, plus loads of amazing songs that I'd later record solo. These became known as the Baby Shambles sessions, and now that Baby Shambles was a thing, you get a real sense through Doherty's book that it was essential for him to have that outlet. He describes this saying, "It sounds a bit corny, but I felt I was perfectly expressing myself as an artist, but it wasn't running parallel to the professional career. The two things seemed completely disconnected to me. Rough trade in the industry machine and being a songwriter and artist didn't seem compatible. Not only that, the situation I was in with the Libertines wasn't compatible with my songwriting or how I was feeling about performing. I felt I was really hitting my stride as an artist and songwriter, and somehow the Libertines wasn't conducive to that stride." So at this point Doherty was in limbo, as he was still part of the Libertines despite being kicked out once already, but his heart already seemingly lay with Baby Shambles. This is apparent during the recording of Don't Look Back Into the Sun, where he chooses to run off with Wolfman instead of staying at the studio. He says, "I did eventually wander in for a few hours. I could hear them warming up without me, and I was so upset. I was a bit of a mess emotionally. I was in a general state of mental flux." Some time passed at this point, and after a stint behind bars, Pete and Carl were reunited for an infamous Freedom gig. But the interesting thing here is that Doherty is reluctant to give the song what Katie did to the Libertines, as he'd earmarked it for Baby Shambles. "We did do an amazing wee set. I think we even threw in What Katie Did, which up to then had been a controversial number, because it was my song, a Baby Shambles song, the only obvious pop classic that Baby Shambles had at the time. This was the Libertines moving in on it. The shadow of Mordor fell over the song, and from then on it was classed as a Libertines song. It's at this point Alan McGee steps in as he tries to rescue what is left of the Libertines, but Pete himself still didn't know which way he was going to go. At that point I really wasn't sure which way it was going to go. I'd really enjoyed that taste of absolute freedom I had with Baby Shambles. No pushing and pulling in different directions, all on the same trajectory. That was so magic. I think that's ultimately my whole point of this video, is that the freedom that he had with Baby Shambles he just couldn't have with Libertines, and that it was inevitable that it was going to go that way. He does talk about a bit of a mad crossover gig where the Libertines and Baby Shambles played in the same night. I promoted this gig there in November when we had Baby Shambles featuring Pat Warden and Seb Rochford, the Libertines with Razzers on drums and the Libertines with Gary on drums, all playing on the same night. Carl played with a bandana covering one eye. The Libertines were really starting to bring in the punters, but in my heart, and it's sad to say it really from today's vantage point, I wasn't connected with the band at all. At this point, despite the Libertines still going, the Baby Shambles really kicked into force. And Pete describes this time saying, "I felt disenfranchised from the Libertines, my own creation. Instead of playing Glastonbury at the end of June with the Libertines, I did a gig at the Rhythm Factory with Baby Shambles. It was a portent of things to come. It was shockingly good, in a much darker way than the Libertines had ever been." And it's at this point that Pete is kicked out the band for what seemed like the final time. And he says, "It was heartbreaking to be exiled from Carl's life, but I'd become a bit more hardened to it by then. I'd given up trying to pretend I was going to get clean. I had absolutely no interest in getting clean. The chaos and camaraderie and circus atmosphere that I wanted for the Libertines, but which wasn't being embraced by the band or the structure we had around us, I had with Baby Shambles. We were a gang that was well up for the ride, lots of amazing characters around us, lots of people had lots of stuff to prove. We really went for it from the word go. We just thought, right, we're going to do this, and it's going to have to be exceptional." So ultimately Pete was kicked out of the band, but by that point it almost feels like a relief for him, as he can run to the freedom of Baby Shambles. I put this idea to Gemma Clark of Baby Shambles when I spoke to her, and this was her response.
Do you think he kind of preferred being on the crazy side of things? Obviously Libertines at that point were getting more kind of, I don't know if polish is the right word, but they were like major management, major labels, major venues. Do you think in a way Pete kind of preferred what you guys are doing?
I like to think so. No, do you know what? Honestly, the way I do like to think of it is Shambles started exactly that. It was an absolute shambles. It was a bit of a kickback from Peter, I think. And it grew into a totally different entity. I think we sounded different. We definitely looked different. And it was a lot more chaotic. Like you say, Libertines were more slick then. I don't know. It wasn't anything that we'd set out to do. It just was so organic. We were just what we were, and it was never discussed. It just happened that way. And yeah, I like to think we were so different. It was not a lot of comparison. That's the word. Mm. Whether people agree with me or not, I don't know.
But what do you think? Do you think Pete Doherty missed out on the Libertines' peak years? Or was separating and starting new bands the best option for everyone at that point? Have your say in the comments.